Hello, now today in my video log I'm going to be discussing whether capital punishment and corporal punishment should be reintroduced and re-implemented in the UK. Corporal punishment is of course an old-fashioned system where teachers would discipline their pupils by using disciplinary implements such as the cane or the slippers. Particularly my parents can recount some horrific tales when my dad was put over the knee of one teacher for not doing his homework or turning up late to class, and I think perhaps it was an ideology shared by a lot of people that the only way to discipline a child was to use violence upon them, but not verbally discipline them. And there are particularly some old-fashioned people who believe that this should be reintroduced. The British National Party, of course, believe that capital punishment should be reintroduced, that people who murder, people who rape, people who commit abominable crimes should be punished in the worst possible way, which of course is by killing them. And I think it's very, very important to remember that capital punishment has evolved. Now, of course, back in the Tudor era, back in the 17th century and in the Victorian era, it was predominantly beheadment, where people were either beheaded or they were tortured, particularly a lot of torturing implements that were used and machinery. And more recently, back in the 50s and the 60s, post-Second World War, people were hung more commonly. Of course, capital punishment was abolished back in 1969. Ruth Ellis was the last ever person to be hung. Corporal punishment was abolished more recently, and I think the argument is that if somebody commits a heinous, terrible crime that can never be undone and can never be reversed, and they go to prison for 15 years for perhaps manslaughter, or even if they go to prison for 25 years for murder, they're still allowed out after that period of time. And 148,000 criminals reoffended last year, and this trend unfortunately is growing. And the argument that a lot of hard-working, innocent citizens in this country have is that criminals are allowed out of prison too early, and they often will reoffend. Particularly, actually, it seems as if it's a bit of a catch-22 situation when somebody goes to prison when they receive a criminal record. It almost sort of turns them into more of a criminal. It sort of toughens them up, the whole experience of being in prison, because it's such a dire, horrific experience that they turn into more of a monster when they come out, and they're more likely to reoffend on a much perhaps larger magnitude and a much larger scale. And, a lot of people perhaps feel, should we have sympathy for people who are mentally challenged, who are disillusional? I'm talking about people who may commit a crime because they're diagnosed with something, or they have a particular condition. Now, of course, it's easy to claim that you have a condition and to be vindicated of a crime. Anybody can do that. There was a man who hacked into the computers and the security system in the White House not long ago, and then he turned around and said, well, I have Asperger's syndrome, and he was absolved. And I don't think that's a particularly valid reason to absolve somebody of a crime, but because he had a condition, he was allowed off. Unless somebody really is mentally disturbed, I think that everybody should be treated equally. If you commit a crime, you commit a crime. You know what you're doing. And I think we need to clamp down on criminals. I think perhaps even extend the life sentence from 25 to perhaps 35, because life sentence suggests that you're in prison for life. But 25 years, somebody can come out and reoffend. And it's not so much people who are convicted for murder. I'm talking about more people who are convicted for rape, paedophilia, and they get a shorter sentence. And then, of course, they come out not long after they're put in, and they commit these terrible crimes again. And I think that it's certainly a worrying factor for the public to have this knowledge in the back of their mind. Somebody commits a crime, they're put away. So the BNP, British National Party, Nick Griffin, is suggesting that capital punishment is reintroduced, that you're not given a second chance. There perhaps are some extenuating circumstances such as theft, which perhaps doesn't warrant being killed. But actually, that's the main most common scenario when people will reoffend is when they commit theft, because of course that doesn't constitute a very long sentence, and thieves will come out of prison 5 or 6 years later, and of course they'll do it again. They'll reoffend. So I think there needs to be a different kind of system. And there was this recent argument how British prisons are too luxurious, that they were able to watch Sky News and they're treated more like guests rather than inmates, rather than prisoners. Again, Nick Griffin's view is that when people go to prison, they shouldn't just be in a room all day, 23 hours of, I think it was, what did he call it, luxurious idleness. Instead of being cloistered away in a prison cell all day, they'd be allowed to go out and they'd be electronically tagged, and they'd have to perform menial labour jobs instead of being cloistered away in a cell. So the prison guards can monitor their every move, but instead of being allowed to do nothing all day like prisoners are at the moment, they'd be forced to do manual labour. So that's another point. But I think there certainly there's many frailties in our criminal justice system, perhaps, and I think the police do a fairly shabby job at most of the time of catching criminals. And I think that I genuinely think the Madeleine McCann investigation and case is a prime example of how the police don't do enough. Now, it took them 6 years to properly investigate this crime and the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. Yes, okay, the police, the Portuguese police opened an inquiry when she was abducted from an apartment in Portugal where she was staying, I think, in the Ocean Club Hotel. But the point is, it's only taken them till now. They've had to reopen the investigation to discover more ties, more links. And now apparently the person who is their main suspect, their main culprit, who's responsible for her abduction, is apparently dead after being sacked from the hotel that they stayed in, where their apartments are. The police believe that he went on some sort of vendetta, some kind of revenge, where he abducted Madeleine McCann to try and prove a point of how bad the security was there. So my point is that more inquiries need to be looked into. I think the police need to be more rigorous and more thorough when they try and catch criminals in the middle of an investigation. And certainly capital punishment is something to consider, perhaps for more severe crimes. I'm not talking about more benign things such as theft, robbery, and even perhaps rape, but murder, I think, and paedophilia certainly. Do these people actually deserve to live if they are depriving somebody else's existence?